Good afternoon, I'm Ed Pozzuoli, President of Tripp Scott, and we're here with another webcast. And today we're honored to be joined by the U.S. Senator from Florida, Marco Rubio. Senator, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, let's start right away with tax reform. It's in the news, and I know that you've come out with a plan with Senator Lee. And tell us a little bit about what your thoughts on tax reform are.
It has to happen. I mean, one of the most important things we can do to help grow the economy is to make us globally competitive. Our tax code doesn't allow America to compete in the world anymore. So anything that simplifies it, makes the burden less, makes us globally competitive, brings back, we're up to over $2 trillion of American corporate cash parked overseas. Imagine that coming back here, whether it's reinvested or paid out to investors, Americans. A lot of these people on pensions, could see dividends go up. And so we got to fix it that way. I'm very focused personally on the increase of the child tax credit for working families, that they would be able to keep more of their own money per child, because it costs so much money to raise kids today.
It does.
We've met families throughout the month of August as we've done this tour around the state. People are making $800 a week and are spending $300 a week on child care.
Right.
So helping families keep more of their money is a real priority for me, and we're working very closely with Ivanka Trump in the White House on that piece of it.
And so describe for us a little bit about where the tax reform process is inside the U.S. Senate.
So I think a lot of the work is going on now, sort of like the baseline, and then we'll have to build on it. It'll go through the Finance Committee. A couple of committees will weigh in on it. Orrin Hatch in the Senate, and then Kevin Brady in the House are taking the lead in their committees. Eventually it'll come to the floor. And I think that process begins in earnest, sort of votes and movement in October, because September is going to be an epic month in terms of the issues that have stacked up, the debt limit, funding the government.
Yeah, we got to get all that done.
Flood insurance reauthorization. Right. If there's going to be a last-ditch effort to do something on Obamacare, that'll be part of it. And now with the storm in Texas, we'll have to do an aid package as well. So there's a lot of stuff crammed into September, and hopefully some nominations that'll get moving. And then getting into October, I think, will dominate the rest of the year on tax reform.
And you think the timing of an actual vote on the floor, both in the House and Senate, will occur in October, November time?
That's our hope. So October, November, so people can, planning purposes. And there'll also be a debate about whether to make it retroactive. In essence, is this going to begin in 18, or will this be a part of 17? And if so, you want to get it done, you can do it in January and make it retroactive, but for planning purposes. But the important thing to understand is we've had some economic growth in the first 9 months of the year. A lot of that has been because after the election, they said, oh, Republicans won, so you're going to have tax reform, regulatory reform, and a lot of the growth is built on that assumption. If something doesn't happen, then I think you could see sort of a retrenchment of some of that growth, and that would be bad. So we've got to get something done.
So the basics around a tax plan would be something you'd be in favor of, some sort of plan around corporate repatriation of monies that are overseas.
Right. Lowering the tax rate for businesses, creating parity for small business that are pass-throughs, simplifying at the personal level, maybe instead of 3 brackets, an increase in the child tax credit. One of the things I really believe in strongly is immediate expensing on capital investment into your business and growth for small businesses in particular. That's very important.
Right, so they can reinvest into new equipment.
Correct. And so, if you're big, your GM, you can 7-10 year schedule may work, but if you're Joe Smith Incorporated, you need, you want to be able to, if you invest $5,000 in something, you want to be able to write it off right away. You may not be around in 7 years.
Right.
So if you can't write it off.
Let me switch gears a little bit on the second subject. I think it's more pertinent to us in South Florida is Venezuela, the circumstance around the Maduro government and the sanctions that have been asked for by the president and the administration, and some of the policies that you've talked through. Explain to our listeners, and what exactly would you like to see?
Well, so look, Hugo Chavez was not pro-American, right? So he had a constitution in place. It elected fraudulently, in my view, the current president.
Right.
They were due for new elections. They had legislative elections. They lost despite trying to commit fraud. Then the presidential elections came due, and they didn't have them. They decided we're going to postpone all these other elections. We don't think we can win elections. Then they've got street protests. So then what the government did is decide, well, we're going to redo the Constitution, and we're not going to use the process the Constitution put in place. We're going to create this new constituent assembly to replace the National Assembly. So it's basically a coup d'etat without the military. They've just rewritten. It would almost be like they just canceled out Congress completely and created a new Congress illegally.
Right.
So street protests, and as a result, human rights violations. On top of all that, a lot of these leaders in Venezuela are incredibly corrupt. Some of them are involved in narco trafficking. All of them are involved in stealing money. And so what the president has done wisely is he has done incremental steps, first against individuals and now against financial dealings of the government. because what they're doing is they are borrowing money from global markets to make the interest payment on debt, and they're taking a small percentage of it, small in terms of the general number, big for them, and giving it to their loyalists to keep everybody loyal. They won't be able to do that through Wall Street or in dollars anymore. And so there's a real high possibility of a Venezuelan default in October or November. And when that happens and they can no longer continue to divvy out goodies to their loyalists, you're going to see real friction within the government there. And the region is supportive of this incremental approach. That's the most important part. Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Honduras, Panama, I mean, all these countries united in this approach. So I think the White House has handled it just right.
And obviously, 2 decades, it's blueprinted 2 decades to how to ruin a country. I mean, effectively what's gone on in the last 20 years or so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the richest countries in the world. It began with Chavez. It's really accelerated now to the point where this is they have the largest oil reserves in the world, but they're not even able to produce the bare minimum because they're not investing in equipment and personnel. It's a total disaster, and hopefully, it can be reversed. And the solution is not a military solution. It's simple. Have an election, an internationally supervised, free and fair election, so the Venezuelan people can choose new and more responsible leaders.
What other than what's been done on the sanctions, what else can be done to try to leverage the government to actually being, having free and open elections?
Ultimately, it's another country, so there's things we can do to help. We can't unilaterally determine the future of Venezuela. It belongs to its people. But I certainly believe that we are doing the best that we can do. We could do more, but we would have to do it alone. I think we are doing as much as we can in unity with the rest of the community, and I think the accumulated pressure of that over a significant period of time will force a democratic opening and a return to rule of law in Venezuela. It's taken longer than I hoped it would. It'll take longer than anybody had hoped it would, but I think we're going to get to that point. I really do, because what they have now is not sustainable.
And we have to keep the pressure on them economically.
Otherwise, this model will be carried out in Colombia. The same people will try to do it in other countries in the hemisphere, and that, after 30 years of democratic growth in the region, we don't want to see us losing ground.
Right. Let me switch gears again. It's been a busy time. What are some of the priorities of the next, 90 to 120 days on your agenda?
Well, obviously, tax reform is critical for the country and for Florida.
Right.
A big priority for me as we look at the budget moving into the new year is I've told the president I think he has the opportunity to go down as the Everglades president. And so continuing to fund the approved programs that are already in place to ensure that the work continues to happen on the Everglades. It's important for Florida. It's a national treasure for the country. That's a critical component of importance to me that we're very focused on. On the foreign policy front, obviously the threats we face, whether it's North Korea, Iranian nuclear ambition, radical jihadists, the NATO coalition, China expansionism. I mean, there's no shortage of those.
No.
And that's why I think it's critical that we fully fund our military. The stronger our military, the less likely it's going to be we have war. These are all ongoing priorities, but the most important thing we can do over the next 3 to 4 months is for the economy is tax reform.
Well, I wanted to thank you on behalf of all your constituents in Florida for being a strong, reasoned voice up in Washington, and we wish you well in the future. And I hope some of these priorities actually get done. Tax reform is important.
It really is, and I think we can.
Thanks again.
Thanks.
All right,
so much.
Senator.